I discovered a secret male criticism circle mocking my marriage. I built a husband's alliance, exposed their abuse, and forced real respect and change. I brought home takeout from her favorite restaurant. What I didn't expect was to hear laughter erupting from our home office. Thinking she was watching something funny, I approached quietly to join in. That's when I heard it my name, followed by roaring laughter. He actually thinks I enjoy watching those boring documentaries with him. My wife's voice rang clearly through the door, slightly distorted by the speakers of her laptop. Last week, he put on this 2-hour special about ancient architecture and kept pointing out interesting facts the entire time. I was dying inside. More laughter followed, and I froze in place. This wasn't some random call with a friend. It sounded like a group chat. "That's nothing," another female voice chimed in. "Mine still hasn't figured out that his cologne gives me a headache. 7 years of marriage, and he thinks I love that awful scent." I stood there, hand frozen midway to the doorknob, as 5 or 6 women took turns tearing apart their husbands' habits, appearances, and personalities. My wife was hosting what appeared to be a weekly ritual, a systematic dissection of the men in their lives. "Ladies, welcome to another session of the Male Criticism Circle," my wife announced with the confidence of someone who'd done this many times before. "Today's topic, things they think they're good at but actually suck at." The takeout bag suddenly felt heavy in my hand. I quietly retreated to the kitchen, set everything down, and poured myself a drink. The sound of their mockery continued faintly from across the house. I recognized most of the voices' wives of men I considered friends. Men who, like me, had no idea they were weekly entertainment for a cruel audience. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I pretended to arrive home 30 minutes later, making enough noise to give her time to end the call. She greeted me with a kiss and asked about my trip as if she hadn't just been ridiculing me to her friends. That night, as she slept beside me, I lay awake planning my next move. Direct confrontation would just lead to denial, tears, and potentially her taking the group underground. No, this required strategic thinking. The following weekend, we attended a barbecue hosted by one of her friends, a member of the criticism circle. I observed the other husbands with new eyes, good men carrying drinks to their wives, telling jokes, completely unaware they were the butts of private jokes in their absence. One guy proudly showed everyone pictures of a bookshelf he'd built, while I remembered his wife mockingly describing his sad little DIY projects just days before. Throughout the event, I caught the women exchanging knowing glances whenever their husbands did something they'd previously mocked. It was like watching a secret society operating in plain sight. During a moment alone at the drinks table, the host's husband, let's call him Bookshelf Guy, mentioned how his wife seemed different lately. More critical, he said, but only when her friends are around, almost like they're putting on a show for each other. That's when the idea struck me. I wasn't the only one sensing something was off. These men weren't oblivious. They were picking up on the disrespect but couldn't quite identify its source. "Have you noticed anything similar?" he asked me, lowering his voice. I took a calculated risk. "Actually, yeah. Been thinking about it for a while now." I paused, then added, "Maybe we should grab a beer sometime, talk about it more." He nodded, relief visible on his face at finding someone who understood. As we rejoined the group, I caught my wife's eye across the yard. She smiled innocently, completely unaware that her weekly entertainment was about to face an unexpected plot twist. On the drive home, she chatted about her friends, praising their hospitality while subtly criticizing their cooking. I nodded at appropriate intervals, my mind elsewhere mentally compiling a list of the other husbands, planning individual approaches for each. This wasn't about petty revenge. This was about respect. And if these women had formed a circle to tear us down, then perhaps it was time for an alliance to build ourselves back up. The game had changed. They just didn't know it yet. The next week was an exercise in self-control. I maintained my usual routine while secretly gathering intelligence. After confirming their weekly call schedule, I strategically scheduled golf with Bookshelf Guy. Not being particularly close before, I needed a natural opening to discuss our suspicions. "Good drive," I commented as he sent the ball flying down the fairway. After some casual conversation, I steered us toward our shared concern. "Remember what we talked about at the barbecue about our wives acting differently around their friends?" He lowered his voice despite being alone on the course. "It's gotten worse. Last night, I overheard her on the phone laughing about something I said during dinner. Called it my clueless husband moment of the week." I nodded, watching his reaction carefully. I've noticed similar things. Have you ever heard them mention a male criticism circle? His eyes widened slightly. Bingo. How did you? He stopped mid-sentence. 2 weeks ago, I saw that phrase in my wife's calendar. When I asked about it, she quickly said it was an inside joke about some podcast they all listened to. We exchanged stories as we played, comparing notes like detectives. By the 9th hole, we'd confirmed our suspicions weren't paranoia. Our wives were systematically mocking us for entertainment. What about the others? He asked. Should we tell them? Not yet, I replied. We need more information, and we need to approach each guy carefully. Some might react emotionally, confront their wives immediately. He agreed. We identified 3 other husbands from the circle who might be receptive, level-headed men who valued respect. Our first target was a financial analyst married to one of the more vocal critics I'd overheard. I engineered a casual lunch meeting through work connections the following day. After building rapport, I mentioned how my wife seemed to behave differently after her weekly calls with friends. He put down his fork. Funny you should mention that. Mine's been the same way. Thursdays, right? You've noticed the timing too? I asked, feigning surprise. Hard not to. Every Thursday evening she's full of these little comments. Maybe you should try wearing shirts that actually fit. Do you have to chew so loudly? Small jabs that weren't there before. By dessert, he was in. 3 down, 2 to go. The 4th husband required more finesse. I invited him and his wife to dinner at our place, then strategically created a moment where the women moved to the patio with wine, while we stayed inside preparing dessert. Your wife seems to be good friends with mine, I said casually. They have that weekly call thing, right? He stiffened slightly. Yeah, some book club or something. Book club, I repeated with just enough skepticism in my voice. Mine calls it something different. He looked at me sideways. What do you mean? Well, have you noticed any changes? Comments about things you do or say, things that used to be fine but suddenly annoy her? His expression shifted from confusion to realization. How did you know? The final husband was the most challenging, completely oblivious and blindly devoted. We needed him on board, though. His wife was the most vicious critic based on what I'd overheard. Bookshelf Guy invited all of us to watch a game at his place, creating an opportunity for group discussion without our wives present. The first 3 of us shared subtle examples of disrespect we'd noticed, watching as the 4th listened with growing concern, but the 5th remained unconvinced. You guys are being paranoid, he insisted. My wife respects me completely. I had anticipated this. Check her calendar for Thursdays. Look for MCC or criticism circle. He laughed it off, but I could see the seed of doubt had been planted. The breakthrough came 3 days later when he called me, voice tight with controlled anger. You were right. I found recordings. She saves their little sessions in a private folder. Did you listen? I asked, already knowing the answer. Enough to make me sick, he replied. She called me her project. Said she was training me like a puppy. They all laughed. All 5 pieces were now in place. We met at a bar across town where none of our wives would spot us. The energy was tense, a mixture of hurt, anger, and determination. So, what now? Asked the financial analyst. Confront them? I shook my head. That's exactly what we're not going to do. Direct confrontation would just make them more careful, more secretive. Then what's your plan? Bookshelf Guy asked. I leaned forward, lowering my voice even though the bar's noise provided ample cover. Gentlemen, we're going to beat them at their own game. We're forming our own alliance. As I outlined my strategy, I watched their expressions shift from skepticism to intrigue to resolute agreement. By the end of the night, the husbands' alliance was officially formed, with a unanimous vote for me to lead our counterstrike. Walking to my car afterward, I felt a strange sense of purpose. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. It was about something bigger, restoring respect not just from our wives, but for ourselves. The women had their circle of criticism. Now we had our circle of action. Let the games begin. Our first official husbands' alliance meeting took place in my garage, converted into a makeshift war room. I'd installed a large whiteboard and set up chairs in a semicircle. The garage door remote was in my pocket, instant security if any wife made a surprise appearance. First rule of husbands' alliance, I began, lightening the mood while establishing the importance of secrecy. We never speak about husbands' alliance. Our advantage lay in the fact that they didn't know we knew. I placed a recording device on the table between us. With permission from the 5th husband, I've compiled key segments from several of their meetings. It's not easy listening, but we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. For the next 20 minutes, we listened in stone-faced silence as our wives dissected our personalities, appearances, habits, and sexual performances with surgical precision and casual cruelty. The financial analyst's knuckles turned white around his beer bottle. Bookshelf guy's face flushed red. They called it husband domestication techniques, the fifth husband muttered, hearing his wife describe breaking him of his annoying habits by using classical conditioning. When it ended, I let the silence linger for a moment. That's what they really think of us. Not the occasional joke or complaint. This is systematic disrespect. I want to storm in there next Thursday and play this back to them, said the fourth husband, anger evident in his voice. Understandable, but ineffective, I replied calmly. That gives them control of the narrative. They'll cry, apologize, claim it was just harmless venting, and within a month, they'll be doing it again just more carefully. I moved to the whiteboard. We're not playing their game. We're changing the game entirely. Our objective isn't revenge for revenge's sake. It's to reestablish respect and reset the power dynamics in our relationships. I outlined our three-phase strategy. Phase 1, information gathering. We document patterns of criticism, passive-aggressive behaviors, and manipulation tactics. Phase 2, strategic disruption. We subtly change our behaviors in ways that confuse and destabilize their perception of control without revealing our awareness. Phase 3, the reversal, a carefully orchestrated series of events that expose their behavior while positioning us as confident, aware men who command respect. This isn't about being angry husbands, I emphasized. It's about becoming men who won't accept disrespect, manipulated or not. The financial analyst raised his hand. What about our individual situations? Each marriage is different. Good point, I acknowledged. We'll have a collective strategy, but with personalized tactics for each relationship. I handed out notebooks. Document everything: comments, criticisms, attempts to train you. Note dates, times, circumstances. This isn't paranoia, it's reconnaissance. We spent the next hour mapping out each wife's specific patterns. The financial analyst's wife used public embarrassment as a control tactic. Bookshelf guy's partner employed passive-aggressive comparisons to other men. My wife's specialty was subtle undermining of confidence through backhanded compliments. Now for immediate action items, I continued. First, we maintain absolute normalcy. Act exactly as you have been, even lean slightly into the behaviors they criticize to maintain the illusion of ignorance. Second, we establish a secure communication channel. I distributed new prepaid phones. These are for alliance communications only. No text history, no call logs on your regular devices. Third, we begin twice-weekly workouts together. This suggestion raised eyebrows. This serves multiple purposes, I explained. A legitimate reason to meet regularly without suspicion, improved physical confidence, which will be important later, and demonstration of value outside of their approval. The fourth husband looked skeptical. Working out is part of psychological warfare? Everything is psychological, I replied. When they notice physical changes but can't identify any other difference in behavior, it creates cognitive dissonance. Plus, looking better while seemingly still being the clueless husband confuses the narrative they've created. As our meeting concluded, I noticed a shift in the men's demeanor. The defeated slump of shoulders had straightened. Eyes that had been downcast now held steady contact. Even their voices had changed deeper, more resonant, as if they were reclaiming something long surrendered. One last thing, I said as they prepared to leave. What happens in your individual marriages after all this is up to each of you. Some relationships might emerge stronger with new boundaries. Others might not survive the truth. That's a personal decision, not an alliance directive. They nodded in understanding. This wasn't just about getting back at our wives. It was about reclaiming our dignity, regardless of the ultimate outcome. After they left, I cleaned up meticulously, leaving no trace of our meeting. My wife texted that she was on her way home from her book club. I smiled at the obvious lie, no longer feeling the sting I once had. As I closed the garage, I caught my reflection in the window. Something had changed in me too, a hardness in the jaw, a clarity in the eyes. The man who had stood frozen outside his office door, takeout bag in hand, heart sinking at his wife's mockery that man was gone. In his place stood someone new, someone who would never again accept disrespect as the price of peace. 3 weeks into our operation, the atmosphere had shifted imperceptibly. Our twice-weekly workouts had become the highlight of my schedule, not just for the physical improvements, but for the camaraderie and strategic planning that occurred between sets. My wife asked if I was using new cologne yesterday, reported the financial analyst as he completed his bench press. I'm not. She's just noticing me differently because of the pheromone changes from working out. Mine keeps checking my phone, added bookshelf guy. She asked if I was having an affair. I nodded, hiding my satisfaction. Phase 2 is working. They're noticing changes but can't identify their source. Cognitive dissonance is building. Our physical transformations were ahead of schedule. Nothing dramatic, we weren't becoming bodybuilders, but the combination of regular exercise, improved posture, and the confidence that comes from having a secret purpose had changed us visibly. We stood taller, made more direct eye contact, spoke with greater authority, all while maintaining the facade of being the same trainable husbands they thought they knew. At home, I implemented my personalized tactics. My wife had always criticized my clothing choices, so I deliberately wore combinations she had previously mocked, but with such confidence that she second-guessed her own judgments. "That shirt actually looks good on you," she said one evening, appearing confused by her own comment. "Always has," I replied with a slight smile, not seeking her approval. During dinner parties, I noticed her watching me with bewilderment when I confidently discussed topics she had ridiculed me for enjoying. The documentary enthusiast she had mocked behind my back was now commanding attention from guests with insightful observations. The real test came during a couple's night out. One of the wives began her usual routine of subtle husband bashing, expecting the others to join in. Instead, following our coordinated plan, the financial analyst smoothly changed the subject. When she tried again, bookshelf guy redirected with a question about vacation plans. The women exchanged puzzled glances as their usual dynamic failed to materialize. I caught my wife studying me later that night, trying to identify what had changed. "You seem different lately," she probed as we drove home. "Do I?" I responded neutrally, neither confirming nor denying. "Are you upset about something?" she pressed. I turned to her with a calm smile that revealed nothing. "Not at all. Life's good." The uncertainty was eating at her exactly as planned. Our next alliance meeting focused on Phase 3 preparations. "The key to the reversal," I explained, "is creating a situation where they expose their behavior themselves, without us directly confronting them." The fifth husband, once the most reluctant, had become our most dedicated member after hearing his wife's recordings. "I've set up the perfect opportunity," he announced. "Our anniversary party next month. All 5 couples will be there, plus other friends and family." His plan was elegant in its simplicity. We would engineer specific conversations, dropped comments, and scenarios that would trigger their criticism patterns, but in a setting where others would witness it. "We're not just exposing them to themselves," I clarified. "We're making their behavior visible to their social circle. Public accountability is far more effective than private confrontation." As we refined the details, my prepaid phone buzzed with an unexpected message from the financial analyst's wife to the criticism circle group chat. His wife had accidentally sent it to his regular number, and he'd forwarded it to us. "Ladies, something weird is happening with the husbands. Anyone else notice changes? Mine's acting almost immune to my usual tactics. Thursday meeting needs to address this disturbing development." I read it aloud to stunned silence followed by laughter. They were noticing but couldn't understand what they were seeing. "Gentlemen," I said, "they're rattled. Now we accelerate." Over the next week, we implemented what we called tactical inconsistency deliberate variations in our responses to their manipulation attempts. One day reacting as expected, the next day not at all. The unpredictability prevented them from adjusting their strategies. My wife's confusion reached its peak when I declined to attend a dinner at her friend's house, something I'd always done reluctantly but obediently before. "But we always go to their dinner parties," she said, visibly thrown by my calm refusal. "Not tonight," I replied simply, heading to my home office with no further explanation. Later, I overheard her phone conversation. "I don't know what's happening. It's like he's become immune overnight. The usual guilt trips aren't working." The criticism circle was losing its power, and they knew it. 2 days before the anniversary party, we held our final planning meeting. Each husband reported similar developments. Wives increasingly confused, frustrated, and in some cases showing unexpected respect in response to our changed dynamics. "Remember," I cautioned, "the goal isn't humiliation, it's reset. We're creating an opportunity for honest relationships based on mutual respect." The fifth husband, whose anniversary would be our battleground, nodded solemnly. And if that's not possible, I answered, then you'll know that too. Better truth than comfortable lies. As we adjourned, Bookshelf Guy pulled me aside. This has already changed my life, regardless of what happens with my marriage. I'd forgotten what it feels like to stand up straight. I understood completely. We'd started this as a response to our wives' disrespect, but it had become something more, a reclamation of self-respect that transcended our marriages. That night, as my wife scrolled through her phone beside me in bed, I felt strangely peaceful. Tomorrow would bring the final preparations, and the day after would bring the reckoning we'd carefully orchestrated. The criticism circle had made a fundamental miscalculation. They'd assumed our ignorance was weakness, that our accommodation was limitation. They'd underestimated what happens when men who have been systematically disrespected decide collectively that enough is enough. They were about to find out. The anniversary party venue gleamed with elegant decorations, the perfect backdrop for the reckoning we'd meticulously planned. I adjusted my tie in the reflection of a decorative mirror, catching sight of my transformed physicality. 3 months of targeted workouts had redistributed weight, squared my shoulders, and added definition that my tailored suit now accentuated. More significant was the internal shift, the quiet confidence that had replaced anxious people-pleasing. The other alliance members exhibited similar transformations as they arrived with their wives, exchanging subtle nods of acknowledgement while maintaining our cover. "You look handsome tonight," my wife commented, genuine appreciation in her eyes. I nodded with a slight smile, accepting the compliment without the eager gratitude she was accustomed to. Her expression flickered with that now familiar confusion. The 5 couples congregated naturally as the party filled with guests. Through our earpieces disguised as smartphone, earbuds worn in just one ear, we maintained constant communication, coordinating our movements with military precision. Financial analyst's wife just suggested they form a circle near the west window, came Bookshelf Guy's voice through my earpiece. Criticism circle assembling in 3, 2, 1, on cue. I positioned myself within earshot but out of sight behind a decorative partition. The women, unaware of being monitored, fell into their familiar pattern almost immediately. "Did you see what mine is wearing?" one wife whispered, not realizing her husband could hear every word through my relayed audio. "He actually thinks that suit flatters him." "At least yours attempted style," another responded. "Mine still needs specific instructions on basic grooming for special events." My wife joined in with practiced ease. "They're like children playing dress-up sometimes, aren't they? Adult supervision required." Through my earpiece, I heard sharp intakes of breath as the husbands listened to this real-time confirmation of our intelligence. Despite weeks of preparation, hearing it live still carried an emotional impact. "Steady," I murmured into my concealed microphone. "Remember the plan. First trigger in 5 minutes." The first orchestrated incident began when the financial analyst accidentally spilled a small amount of wine on his sleeve. Rather than fussing over him as she typically would, using the moment to highlight his clumsiness, his wife found herself addressing an empty space. He'd already handled it with a napkin and resumed conversation with another guest, completely bypassing her opportunity for public criticism. Her momentary bewilderment registered on her face, triggering knowing glances among the criticism circle members. Similar moments unfolded throughout the evening, carefully constructed scenarios where each husband short-circuited the established patterns of public embarrassment and condescension. With each failure of their usual tactics, the wives' confusion grew visibly. The party reached its crescendo when the 5th husband called for everyone's attention for an anniversary toast. This was our pivotal moment. "Before I toast my beautiful wife," he began, "I want to thank some people who've been instrumental in our lives." He proceeded to thank various guests, building to the moment when he acknowledged his male friends. "And to these 4 gentlemen, thank you for your brotherhood, wisdom, and support. You've reminded me what it means to stand tall." The 5 of us exchanged meaningful glances as we raised our glasses. To the crowd, it appeared to be a standard toast. To our wives who had mocked that exact phrase, "stand tall," in their criticism sessions, it landed like a thunderbolt. I watched my wife's champagne glass freeze midway to her lips, her eyes widening in dawning horror. The same realization rippled across the faces of the other wives. The financial analyst's wife was the first to break formation, pulling him aside with forced casualness. Through my earpiece, I heard her urgent whisper, "What exactly did he mean by 'stand tall'? That exact phrase?" "Exactly what he said," he replied calmly. "Why? Is there some reason that phrase bothers you?" Her face paled. "No, Has he said that to you before?" "We talk about a lot of things," he replied with deliberate ambiguity. The perfect execution of our plan continued as Bookshelf Guy's wife approached him with similar panic barely concealed.
"How long have you all been friends? I mean, this close?"
"We've always been friends," he responded. "We've just become more intentional about it recently." The wives converged in the bathroom shortly after an emergency session we'd anticipated and prepared for. The fifth husband's wife, returning to the party first, looked visibly shaken. "Phase 3 complete," I murmured into my microphone. "Final positions in 3 minutes." I found my wife alone on the terrace, staring into the darkness with a troubled expression. I stood beside her, maintaining silence until she spoke. "How much do you know?" she finally asked, voice barely audible. I turned to face her directly, my expression neither angry nor accusatory, just steadily aware. "Everything." The color drained from her face. "The Thursday calls." "The male criticism circle," I clarified. "Every joke, every mockery, every attempt to train me like some household pet. Yes, I know it all." She started to form excuses, but I raised my hand slightly. "I'm not interested in explanations or apologies offered only because you've been discovered." "How long have you known?" she asked, genuine shock in her voice. "Long enough to realize it wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. Long enough to hear you describe techniques for manipulating me to your friends. Long enough to understand that respect was missing from our relationship." Her eyes darted around the party, spotting the other husbands now positioned strategically around the room, each engaged in similar private conversations with their wives. "All of you know?" I nodded once. "All of us." The realization that their private mockery had been exposed not through angry confrontation, but through calculated strategy visibly upended her sense of control. "What happens now?" she asked, vulnerability replacing her usual confidence. I looked her directly in the eyes. "That depends entirely on your next move." As the party continued around us, 5 marriages hung in the balance, not because we had delivered ultimatums, but because we had finally established boundaries. The criticism circle had been exposed not through shouting or accusations, but through strategic revelation of awareness. Power dynamics, once unconsciously tilted against us, now balanced on the fulcrum of mutual respect. The game had changed permanently, and only those willing to play by new rules would remain at the table. The week following the anniversary party unfolded like a psychological chess match across 5 separate households. Through our secure communication channel, each alliance member reported similar patterns: initial shock, attempts at damage control, and finally genuine confrontation with the truth. My wife oscillated between defensive justification and mortified silence. "It was just venting," she insisted the morning after the party. "Everyone complains about their spouse sometimes." "Venting is momentary frustration," I replied calmly, continuing my breakfast without breaking rhythm. "What you created was a systematic ritual of disrespect. There's a difference." Her defenses crumbled under the weight of specificity. I didn't speak in generalities. I referenced exact comments, specific dates, particular mockeries she'd shared with her friends. The precision of my knowledge left no room for minimization. By the 3rd day, her approach shifted. "What can I do to fix this?" she asked as we prepared for bed, vulnerability replacing her usual confidence. I set my book down and gave her my full attention. "That depends. Are you asking how to repair appearances or how to rebuild respect?" "Both," she admitted, then corrected herself. "Know the respect. I want to understand how we got here." That was the opening for the conversation I'd prepared for weeks, not about the criticism circle itself, but about the fundamental dynamics that had allowed it to exist in the first place. "We both contributed to this," I acknowledged. "I accepted disrespect because it seemed easier than confrontation, but you chose to mock rather than communicate directly." For 2 hours, we dissected our relationship patterns with unprecedented honesty. She revealed insecurities I'd never suspected. I admitted compromises I'd made to keep peace. The conversation wasn't comfortable, but it was necessary, the first step toward authentic reconnection. Meanwhile, reports from the alliance painted varied pictures of aftermath in the other marriages. The financial analyst and his wife had entered counseling, both committed to rebuilding. Bookshelf Guy had separated temporarily, using the space to reassess his boundaries and needs. Most surprising was the 5th husband, whose marriage had paradoxically strengthened immediately. "She respected the strategy," he reported during our final alliance meeting. "Said it showed more backbone than she thought I had. were actually better than before. We gathered at a private room in a restaurant across town, no garage this time, no need for secrecy. The atmosphere was different, less conspiratorial, more celebratory. Each man had reclaimed something essential, regardless of his marriage's current status. "I've been thinking about our original objective," I said as we raised glasses for a toast. "We called this the Husband's Revenge Alliance, but that's not what it became." Nods of agreement circled the table. "This wasn't about getting even," continued the financial analyst. "It was about getting equal. There's a difference. To equality," bookshelf guy proposed, raising his glass. "And to brotherhood." We clinked glasses, marking the official conclusion of our alliance's active operations. The bonds formed would remain, but our mission had reached its natural end. When I returned home that evening, my wife was waiting with a level of attentiveness I hadn't seen in years, not the performative kind that preceded asking for favors, but genuine presence. "I disbanded the Thursday group," she announced without prompting, "permanently." I nodded, acknowledging her decision without excessive praise. "That's a start. The others wanted to understand how you all figured it out," she continued. "I told them it doesn't matter how. What matters is why you needed to." Her insight surprised me. "And why was that?" "Because we stopped seeing you as equals," she said simply. "And you refused to accept that." In that moment, I recognized the potential for something better than what we'd had before, not just the absence of disrespect, but the presence of genuine partnership. Over the subsequent months, each alliance marriage followed its own path. Two emerged stronger, with new foundations built on mutual respect. One ended in divorce, not a failure, but a recognition of irreconcilable damage. The other two, including mine, entered a period of careful rebuilding, the outcome still unwritten, but hopeful. The weekly criticism circle disappeared completely. In its place, some of the wives formed a book club, an actual book club, not a cover for mockery. Husbands were occasionally invited to join discussions, creating shared intellectual ground that strengthened several relationships. 6 months after our discovery of the criticism circle, the 10 of us, 5 husbands, 5 wives, found ourselves at the same restaurant where it had all begun. The seating arrangement had changed. No longer wives at one end and husbands at the other, but couples interspersed, conversation flowing naturally across gender lines. My wife leaned over during dessert. "They're different," she whispered, gesturing subtly toward the other husbands. "All of them more present, more substantial somehow." I smiled slightly. "They're not different. They're just no longer pretending to be less than they are." Later that night, as we drove home, she asked the question that had clearly been on her mind for months. "Will you ever fully trust me again?" I considered my answer carefully. Trust isn't binary. It's not all or nothing. It's a continuum that shifts with evidence. "And what evidence are you looking for?" she pressed. "Consistency," I replied. "Not perfection, but a pattern of respect that becomes so natural you don't have to think about it." She nodded, understanding the fundamental shift our relationship had undergone. We were no longer operating on autopilot, taking each other for granted. Every interaction now carried weight, contributing to a new foundation being laid one day at a time. As we pulled into our driveway, I reflected on the journey from that Thursday evening when I'd stood frozen outside my office door, takeout growing cold in my hands. The pain of that moment had transformed into something unexpected, not just the restoration of respect, but the discovery of authentic connection that had been missing long before the criticism circle began. The Husbands Alliance had served its purpose and disbanded, but the principles remained. Boundaries enforced without anger, standards maintained without apology, and respect demanded as the price of admission to our lives. Some called it revenge. I called it restoration. The difference wasn't just semantic. It was the difference between a reaction and a revolution. In the end, what we'd created wasn't just the downfall of a criticism circle, but the rise of men who would never again mistake accommodation for peace or sacrifice self-respect at the altar of relationship harmony. That was redemption.